You may hear some sounds now and then from nature or welcome to Casual Friday. Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is my weekly Casual Friday podcast. If you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, you can tap or mouse over the video playback area of your screen to reveal the chapter titles and starting points of each section. You may notice that I do not have my familiar backdrop behind me, and that's because I'm currently on the road in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So this week I do have some tidbits for you, as well as some road trip project updates. I have a vintage book unboxing that I recorded when I was back in Minneapolis that I will share with you today, and I have a road trip story of old friends and new that I'd like to share with you. So let's get started. This first tidbit is just sort of a housekeeping tidbit that has to do with my YouTube channel. So lots of you leave comments, and I really love that. And some of you leave comments that include links. Now that is perfectly fine with me. YouTube tries to make sure that links that are left in the comments are not spam. And so sometimes they're really good at filtering those out, and sometimes they aren't. And I have to go through and delete those particular comments from my channel. But sometimes people leave comments with links that are perfectly fine that YouTube suspects might be spam, and they put them in this holding area that waits for me to approve them. And then when I see them, when I notice them, sometimes it takes a few days or weeks, then I'll approve them, and then they'll show up in the comments on my channel. But once in a while, YouTube thinks something is spam, and they don't even give me the opportunity to approve it or not. They just delete it. And that happened to one of my viewers a couple of weeks ago, and we were trying to figure out what the problem was, because I do have the power to prevent anyone from putting any kind of link, but I haven't done that. So we did finally figure out, and it was a comment I absolutely welcomed. And so we figured out how she could do the comment and just leave the link out. It was to an external website that was perfectly fine, but for some reason YouTube didn't like it. So just be aware that sometimes if you leave a link and then your comment disappears, more than likely it's YouTube deciding that it might be some kind of risky spam, and they will just delete it without even asking me. So just wanted you guys to know that. This next tidbit, I have mentioned this before, but it's something that, because I need to look this up every once in a while, I figured it wouldn't be a bad idea to give this reminder. While I was here, it was in Santa Fe, I went shopping with my mother-in-law and got a couple of linen dresses, which are really great for hot summer weather. And it was really hot when we were first here. And so I wore it several times, and I needed to wash it. And I looked at the care label, and it used only the international signs for laundry care, and did not have any written instructions. Now, I'm pretty familiar with some of those symbols because they often appear on yarn labels, particularly if the yarn was manufactured for a European yarn company. You'll see those international symbols. Especially on sock yarn, it will have symbols for what temperature to wash, whether it needs to be hand washed, if it's okay for dryer or bleach, all of those kinds of things. Each one of those types of steps in the laundry cycle is included on the label. So there were a couple of symbols that I wasn't really quite sure of what they were, and so I looked them up. So what I'm going to share down in the show notes is a link to an article that explains what all of those laundry symbols mean, so that you can interpret them. So for example, for how to actually wash a garment, there will be a little box, and there will be a symbol that represents a tub of water. You'll see the little waves. And inside of that little tub of water, you'll see a number that's in Celsius, and that indicates what the temperature of the water, the maximum water temperature that you can wash that in. And if you see a hand in that tub. That means hand wash only. So there are symbols for a wash cycle. There's symbols for how to dry it, whether it needs to be hung to dry, drip dry, lay flat, if it can be dried in the dryer, whether it has to be line dried, whether you can use bleach or not, if it can be dry cleaned, and if it can be dry cleaned, there's different symbols for the kinds of chemicals that can be used. So everybody has to wash their clothes, and you may have clothing that has those symbols and wonder what they mean. So you can find those. I'll link to that down in the show notes. Viewers often ask me what knitting channels I watch, and while I do sometimes watch different knitting videos, I am not a regular subscriber of knitting channels. Usually when I'm sitting down to watch YouTube videos, I want to watch something that I know very little about but just find intriguing. And one of the things that I have really enjoyed over the past couple of months, and I shared with my mother-in-law while we were here in Santa Fe, is a channel called Baumgartner Restorations. So he is a conservator and restorer of fine art paintings. It is so fascinating to watch what he does in order to evaluate a painting ahead of time that needs cleaning or needs repair or conservation of some sort. The way that he will take ultraviolet photographs to see if there has been overpainting done in a previous repair, how he evaluates the varnish that's currently on the painting so that he will know exactly how to remove it, how he takes it off of the frame, how he removes all the previous restoration work in order to get down to just the original painting, and then evaluate how to fix it with his impact being very minimal and in many ways invisible, that you won't notice what he's done. It is so fascinating, and it just seems to me that people who like to knit tend to have an interest in other crafts or handicrafts, just how people make things or how they repair things, how people work with their hands. And so I think this is a really fascinating YouTube channel that you might really enjoy. And as always, I'll leave a link down in the show notes. This next tidbit came out of last week's tidbit, where I was talking about everyday words that we use in our language that are related to textiles. And I was asking you guys if there were some words that are related to textiles that you really like. And a couple of people mentioned the word Clew. So in English, we spell that word C-L-U-E, but it comes from an older word that was spelled C-L-E-W, which meant a ball of yarn, like strings and that were wound into a ball of yarn. And so the word clue that we use today, that means like the pieces of information that we need in order to solve a mystery, comes from that word of these little strings, because I'm going to read this little bit to you. This notion is at least as old as Greek mythology. Legend has it that Theseus unwound a ball of string as he made his way to the heart of the labyrinth, then killed the dreaded Minotaur and followed the string to find his way out again. So as an extension of this idea, Clew with the EW or clue with the UE subsequently came to mean a fact, circumstance, or principle which, being taken hold of and followed up, leads through a maze, perplexity, difficulty, intricate investigation, etc. I thought that was fascinating, that a ball of yarn is where we get the word clue. This last tidbit is one that came to me a couple of weeks ago, and I saved it. I think I saved it. I don't think I told you about it. I saved it because I knew I was going to be on this road trip, and it would be harder for me to keep up with my social media links while I was on the road. So my apologies if I shared this with you already. But I got a message. I don't even know where I got it from. It was on Ravelry or Twitter, or I'm not even sure where. But the message was, if your interest in wool extends to historical spinning and weaving and clothing design, there's a terrific YouTube program called The Invention of the Trousers. It's produced by the German Archaeological Institute, but the program is in English. So I'm going to leave a link. It's a like 45-minute YouTube video, and it's about a location in China. The archaeologists were had a dig, and it's in a very dry area of China. And so there was this big area that was used as a cemetery or graveyard, and they discovered that there was, you know, some bodies, and they were digging them up, and they were incredibly well preserved. There was this body that had the clothing was intact, and that is what is so difficult with textiles, is they tend to degrade very quickly. But because of the really dry conditions, they had not. And now this was a much older body that had wearing trousers than they had ever seen before, and they were in such good condition. So the challenge with understanding these trousers is that often you don't have people who know a lot about textiles who are doing archaeological work. So this museum was working with different people in terms of figuring out how the fabric was woven and recreating it, because the fabric was woven in such a way that it was not cut. There were pieces that were sewn together, but everything that had the different shapes was woven that way. And then there were different, really more complex weaving techniques used at different points that would hit the body at different points in the trousers. And they were a really unusual shape. So the whole thing was this process of figuring out how these trousers were made, getting the cloth woven the right way, getting the yarn spun the correct way. In fact, they couldn't spin the quantity of fiber that they needed commercially. And so somebody who worked at the museum, an older man, had learned to spin when he was a child. He did the spinning at the museum, and then a weaver came in and did the weaving, and then they figured out how to construct them, and then they had somebody wear them. They got it all figured out, and then they figured out the occupation of the person who was wearing that clothing and why it was shaped the way it was, just based on all of this work they did on the trousers. Really, really fascinating. Again, I apologize if I told you about this before. I don't think I did. I think I did save it for you today, and the link is down in the show notes. I'm going to give you guys a road trip project update. I just got up out of this chair and was digging through the various different project bags that I brought along with me to find my socks, and I reached in and I stabbed myself with a 2mm needle right into between my fingers. It hurt so bad. I finished one of the socks before the trip, and I started the second sock in the car on our trip. So the drive from Minneapolis to Santa Fe takes a couple of days. It's a good 22-hour drive, and so we do a long drive, stay overnight, and then a shorter drive to get to Santa Fe. So I do have a limit to how much I can stand knitting in a particular day. I really enjoy knitting, but there gets to be a point where, oh my gosh, I'm so sick of this. I want to be doing anything else. So I was doing a lot of knitting in the car and not so much knitting when I wasn't in the car for a couple of days. But I knit this entire sock on the way to Arizona. So we had a couple of days in the car to get to Santa Fe, and then once we were driving from Santa Fe to Scottsdale, I finished it up in the car. I mentioned last week that I was experimenting with some different methods for closing the holes. I've always been able to have no trouble closing holes at those corners where the heels meet the instep, but I don't always like the result from the right side of the work as much as I would like to like the results. So I've been experimenting with some different things, and I tried a new technique on the first sock. Wasn't thrilled with the result. There was still kind of a hole from the right side of the work. I closed them up on the wrong side of the work using my yarn tails, and I tried a different method in the second sock that I knit in the car. And I like this result much better. So I'm going to do a few more experiments and see if I can figure out a way to explain. It's kind of futzy. So a lot of people don't like futzy. They like easy and they like acceptable. So I'll have to work out how I'm going to explain that, because sometimes what I'm willing to do is not what other people are willing to do. It's not that I'm unwilling to share it. It's just some people are going to go, oh my gosh, why don't you just do, such and such? And it's because I don't mind futzy, but other people do. So the second thing I've been working on is the second sleeve of my 1960s vintage sweater, which I am so ready to be done with. It's a lot of stockinette, and it's the second sleeve of a sweater that's all stockinette. So I'm not that happy, I'm kind of bored with it. So when I was in Scottsdale, I knit the sleeve cap. I started down here, knit it up this direction. I've talked a few times about why I'm doing the sleeve construction the way I am. And then after I finished, because that cap had to be knit flat, then I came back. I had a provisional cast on, and I rejoined. I picked up the provisional cast on, joined it in the round in order to work the sleeve top down. So I'm getting to be to the point where I was with the first sleeve, which is about the location. If I was going to have 3/4 length sleeves, it would be time to start the ribbing on the first sleeve. I wanted to see on the second sleeve, once I got to that same point, exactly how much yarn I had left in order to see how much longer I could make the sleeves. I don't think I'll quite be able to make them as long as I would like. They might be what someone recently told me was called bracelet length. It might just be a little bit short, which I would rather have than a 3/4 length. I really don't like 3/4 length. I brought all of my yarn with me, but I did not bring my swatch with me because I can reuse my swatch yarn if I don't have enough. So I'm not sure. I'm going to be I'm not sure what I'm going to do in the car. Oh, I know. I have some more sock yarn. I brought some. I brought yarn here in Santa Fe as well. I went to a yarn shop called Hacer Santa Fe, which means to make. Hacer is the verb hacer. I went to a yarn shop just to see what it would be like. So this shop in Santa Fe she isn't just a yarn shop, she's also a fabric store. So she has some quilting fabrics, and she has some fabrics for sewing, and she has some notions and various types of things. So it's a small shop that has a few different types of things, and I thought it was an interesting shop. So the yarn that I bought was called Chasing Rabbits, from Chasing Rabbits Fiber Company. And they're on Instagram as @ChasingRabbitsFiber. So this yarn is from Polwarth. So I love finding a yarn that is made from a wool breed that you don't see everywhere. So I've heard of Polwarth. Polwarth. I don't know how to pronounce it. I want to say Polwarth, but it might be Polwarth. And it might depend on what country or what region you're from, how you pronounce it. But this is a 4-ply fingering 100% superwash, and it is a really beautiful color. It's a kind of a dark red, and I love me a red yarn. Now, I haven't been knitting a lot. I hardly ever knit socks with a solid color, with a texture pattern, but I really loved this yarn, and because it's Polwarth, I wanted to try it. So I bought that. Now she had some fabrics there, and I'm not confident enough about fabrics and what I need. Just impulsively buy something. But I did see a pattern there. It was from like an independent pattern designer, but in hard copy form. So I'd heard about these kinds of sewing patterns because I've done the PDF downloads before, and obviously I've sewn with commercial sewing patterns many times, but this I was interested in. It's called the Alder Shirtdress, And this is a kind of dress I like for summertime that's sleeveless and hangs from the shoulders. It's the kind of dresses I bought when I was here in Santa Fe on the first leg of the trip. And it's got a little bit of a collar and the buttons and stuff. So it has some interest. It's a simple dress, but it has some interesting features that I think as a advancing skills as a sewer would be valuable. So I bought a sewing pattern. And in addition, she had Kelburn Mills Germantown wool that she carried. So I know I can order that online. I've seen it online, but I was really happy to go into a shop that actually carried it, and I could see the color that I wanted. She didn't have enough of the color in the same dye lot, but I'm still buying it from her. So I'm still ordering it online from her, but I know it's from that particular shop, and I like to support a local yarn shop. That is only the second yarn shop I have walked into in the past year and a half. Once the pandemic started, I was only mail ordering, and I went into one shop, which is right next to my hairdresser. I had 5 minutes one day waiting outside to get my hair cut, and I just snuck over. It was in the summertime, their doors were open, and I quickly went in, bought sock yarn, and then came out. But I have not been to a yarn shop otherwise for, except for those two for so long. So it was just so nice to just walk through a new store I hadn't been in and see what they had. I had a lot of fun. So I think that is it for my project updates, and I will do overhead updates to kind of show you what I do with my sock. And I imagine I will be very, very close to be done with my 60s sweater next week. The knitting is really close to being done. So I'll be so happy to be done with that particular project. I still need to sew the skirt that goes with the hand woven tweed that came with that vintage yarn. But the sweater, thank goodness, is almost done, and I can get on to working on my next sweater project. A couple of months ago, when my P.O. box was brand new, a viewer named Ria, who lives in Canada, said she had a couple of sock pattern booklets that she wanted to get rid of, and would I be interested in them? And so she sent them to me. Well, a few weeks ago, she had a couple of more books that she was in possession of. She was helping a friend clear out her mother's old knitting patterns, and so she had a collection of knitting patterns she thought I might be interested in. And then she also had a dressmaker's book from the 1950s. So I've been getting into sewing recently, and I certainly am interested in vintage clothing in that way. Maybe not so much sewing from vintage sewing patterns, but I'm certainly interested in books that explain process. And so she asked me if I was interested in those books. I said, absolutely, send them to me. So they arrived the other day, and I thought that because I wasn't really sure what was in there, I thought I would unbox it on camera. So that is what is going to happen next. We'll go through the pattern booklets and the sewing manual, and you can see what I got in the mail from Ria. Okay, so I started cutting this open, and then I realized I should really do this on camera. So I'm almost all the way open here. There we go. Okay, so let's see. It's a note. So I'm going to read those off camera. Let's see. So we've got a sock book from 1948, which I'll look through in a minute. We've got Style Knits by Beehive. Ooh, 1950. And I'm looking for some 50s things. And then this is from 1960. This booklet, the New Luxe Knitting Book 1951 edition. This is the thing that sounded really interesting to me. Now, I know I'm getting back into sewing, but I'm not really necessarily collecting sewing patterns, but books are a different thing. So this is a book about pattern drafting and grading, and it's meant for dressmakers from what she mentioned to me. So it has how to design all kinds of this is really great because I have a few books on sewing, but I don't know that any of them have this kind of detail. I've got, this is going to be really interesting. So this is fantastic. So thank you very much, Ria. So let's look at this Monarch sock book from 1948. This is these mid-century intarsia or color block designs. Typically, these are knit flat, so you have a seam coming up the back, and that's so you can knit back and forth in different colors. And then they might, depending on the pattern, they might join in the round in order to knit the toe and then graft it shut. But the seam will go up the back of the leg here, and then a lot of times you'll end up with two seams at the side that will join the top to the bottom. So they're warning about failure when it comes to sock yarns. Okay, these are just your basic plain stockinette or ribbed socks. So those would be knit in the round. So let's look at these up close and see what these look like. These all look like they're color block knitting, and I'm going to have to go through and see if any of them are the kind that don't require a bobbin, where you would create a diamond shape through decreases and increases, and then you would do some picking up stitches. Some of these are really interesting. I really like this this design right here. All right, so these are all in color and very nice. Oh, these are the same socks that we saw before. Oh, interesting. This kind of stripes going through the diamonds. Interesting. And this actually has some more colors in it than I had thought. I really kind of like these ones that are only on part of the leg. A couple of more texture designs, cables. This one looks like it's got a little bit of color worked into the side. So this is interesting. This is intarsia plus a cable up the side. This one's just got a little color detail on the side. So then we've got some on the back cover as well. They really have, it's interesting that they have so many of these socks where it's only on part of the leg, kind of near the ankle, where maybe you'd see it when your pant leg was exposed. So this is this 1950 book, which I'm very interested in because I have so many books for 1940s. I'm overwhelmed by my choices, but 1950s I have fewer. So we'll see what's in here. So you've got your boat neck. There's a yoke sweater, and I would bet you anything. They're calling it a Nordic cardigan. I bet you anything that is knit flat. Yeah, this is knit flat back and forth, which is kind of what I expected. I also imagine that there's no shaping at the back in order to raise the neck up. That was not common at all. They tended to be just a round neck back then. Well, these are just your basic sweaters, classics that are probably not that interesting to knit. I do like the looks of this collar here, although I don't know that I could put up with knitting all that stockinette in order just to have that interesting little detail right there. And this one comes in, it's got half-length sleeves, but you could do long sleeves. It comes in a cardigan as well. So this raglan jacket is interesting because they're diagonal pockets. So I've done one project so far for this decade by decade project that had pockets, but they were sort of standard lined pocket. And this is a diagonal pocket. And look at the raglan line. That's really interesting. And then the collar, it's a mitered collar. So that's actually kind of interesting. I wonder what sort of, oh my gosh, seriously? Oh, I thought it said 9 stitches per inch. It's 9 stitches every 2 inches. So it's like an Aran weight, this jacket. That's actually, again, with the 3/4 length sleeves, which is not my favorite. But this has got some elements in it that definitely scream 50s, but are things that are different from some things I've done before. So that's potentially very interesting. This sweater here is a color work. It's probably a slip stitch pattern, most likely. Well, this has got an interesting collar. I can't really tell what actually is going on there with this collar. I'd have to chart it out or something, because and this all of the sea of stockinette, you know, 8 stitches per inch, so not really what I want to do. So this is a short sleeve sweater with this Intarsia bird of paradise design. That's kind of interesting. And you see one of the rare charts of earlier in the century, which is color based, and which they use symbols to designate each color. So this is a very 50s thing, this Angora pullover, also given with short sleeves. So they've got a lot of sleeve length options in these sweaters. Basic cardigan. This again screams 50s to me a little more, just the 3/4 length sleeves. Oh, this is also interesting. This is probably a dolman sleeve, and you can tell that this is because of the direction of the knitting on the sleeve, that the body and the sleeves were all knit together in one piece, and there's no seam over here, and that's exactly what it is. This is one where you start at the bottom of the back up and then come down. Again, here's some more heavier weight like jackets. Not terribly interesting, although they do have pockets. That was great. And then finally, we've got another sock booklet. This time it's from 1960, and it feels like there's a lot fewer sock patterns in here. So this is just a knit purl pattern that's kind of hard to see. Knotty Pines. I was going to say they kind of look like trees. It's called Knotty Pines. This one's got some cables and then some texture on the sides. Oh, you can see right here, it's a little reminiscent of like a Gansey pattern where you have the 2 cables and then you have this pattern up the center. Again, some texture up the sides, and then they show here a little more clearly what it is. This just looks like plain socks. Like it's like a Tweedy yarn and a solid yarn. That's interesting. Some color work. Some more color, another slip stitch pattern there. And probably stranded color work here, but maybe not. And you can tell by looking that the sole is not done, that this is going to have to be knit flat, most likely, at least for the sole. I'd have to read to see what it said for the leg, but it could be knit in the round and then divided in half in order to work the instep in the color work back and forth, and then to work the solid sole, and then probably joined in the round again. I'm guessing that would be, if I were designing it, that's how I would do it. Some pretty plain socks there. I always liked this effect where you have the colors on the sides like that. I'd have to read it to figure out how they were doing that. And it might be, again, a seam up the back and then having 2 sets of black, one on each side of the opening on the back, so that you can work the color work section right here. Some more color work. This is some more texture. This picture is kind of dark, but it looks like a pretty basic, like an elongated moss stitch type of thing. And then we've got some more texture patterns here. And this is a spiral sock, so it's got no heel in it. And so this idea of knitting in this spiral is that it will go on your foot a little better, and then the spiraling nature helps it to stay on. I don't know how
people can get it on their foot. I can't even get a standard short row heel on my foot. So I don't know how they do that so that you can actually get it past your heel, especially if you have a high arch. So that's it.
A couple of weeks ago, a relatively new viewer named Teresa joined my Ravelry group and mentioned that we had kind of an interesting connection. And so she told me the story about going down to visit her nephew who lives in Alabama. Her nephew has a new baby, and Teresa, being a very good aunt and knitter, made clothes for that baby, obviously, and brought them with her. Well, in addition to visiting her nephew, Teresa's sister, who lives in Georgia, drove to Alabama to be part of that visit as well. And Teresa, when she was showing the knitted items, didn't want to get into too much detail because these are non-knitters, but she was referring to this YouTube channel that she was watching, and she referred, which was mine, and she was referring to me as her new knitting lady. And she didn't go into too much detail. But her sister said, oh, I have a friend who's something like a master knitter, something like that. And Teresa said, a master hand knitter? Because she had learned about what a master hand knitter is from my channel. And Ronnie's like going through her phone, looking, and she held it up and said, that's my friend. And Teresa said, that's my knitting lady. So I went to high school with Ronnie, but I had never met Teresa because she was a couple of years older and she was in college when I moved to the town where our high school was. So I thought that was really a funny coincidence. Well, in addition to being in Santa Fe this past week, we also drove down to Scottsdale, Arizona to visit my father-in-law. So whenever I'm down in Scottsdale, Arizona, I'd like to give a call to my best friend from high school, whose name is Bonnie, and we go and have lunch together. So I texted Bonnie and I said, I don't know if you're available on Wednesday, but would you like to get together for lunch? She said, absolutely. And she asked if she could bring her sister-in-law along. Now, during the past year, during the pandemic, her sister-in-law, Jane, had come over to their house quite a bit to sit in the backyard. And I mean, everybody's in their own little bubble. And she would come over and they would knit. And she was constantly talking about her knitting guru on YouTube. And Bonnie mentioned that her friend from high school was a knitter and had a YouTube channel. And it turned out, no shocker, that the knitting guru and Bonnie's high school friend are the same person, which is me. But Bonnie and Ronnie were also friends in high school as well. Neither one of them are knitters, but I thought it was funny that we had this connection. So I went to lunch with Bonnie the other day, and she asked could she bring her sister-in-law Jane along. And so we all had a very nice lunch together in a very loud restaurant. And we then thought, well, let's go find a coffee shop and then it's quieter and then we can just sit and talk for longer because it was so hard to hear in that restaurant. So we drove to the nearest coffee shop, which was a drive-through coffee shop. So that was no good. So then we found a Starbucks that was nearby, which turned out to be in a Target and no seats. So then we found some benches outside and we were sitting on them. This is Scottsdale, Arizona. In the summertime. It's been like 115 degrees there for the past couple of weeks. It started to rain. So we sat in the car for about an hour and we're just talking about all sorts of things. And then we finally did get a picture at the end of it. So my friend, this is me and my friend Bonnie, and then her sister-in-law Jane, who watches me, hi Jane, is in the back seat there. So that was just I thought it was a fun road trip story that you guys might enjoy. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.